like to take the time to thank the Vered Jewish Canadian Studies program at the University of Ottawa, the Association of Canadian Jewish Studies, the Microprogramme in Jewish Studies at Universität de Montréal, and the FAÉCUM for the funding. Today, we are fortunate to welcome Netta Schramm for her lecture Sound Beliefs, Narrative and Performance, in the works of Yeshayahu Leibovitz, Ovadia Yosef, and Irving Greenberg. And as a brief introduction, Netta Schramm is an advanced PhD candidate focused on modern Jewish thought at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Netta also conducted her doctoral research as a Minerva Fellow at Ludwig Maximillians Universität in Munich. She uses performance theory and narratology to read audiovisual archival materials of modern and contemporary Jewish thinkers. Previously, she has focused on a Zionist adaptation of the Tzene Irene, the hermeneutics of the Israeli television show The Jews Are Coming, and the narrative structure of BBC audio drama Miriam and Yusuf. Netta has published her research in Jewish film and new media, Pardes and Musa, and annotated and translation published in CCAR. She presented her work at international conferences, including Harvard University, the World Congress of Jewish Studies, 2 AJS conferences, and more. Netta holds a bachelor's degree in physics and master's degree in Jewish thoughts. Her MA thesis was awarded the Goran Prize for Jewish Renewal Study. As usual, the presentation will be half an hour-ish, and at the end, we will have a question period. Netta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here, and thank you so much. I will share my screen at the beginning without the video, and then I'll reshare my screen. Wait a moment, that's not the way I wanted to do it. We'll just do this, one moment, sorry. This will work better, sorry. Let's get this going this way, and let me know when you see the whole screen. Is that working? You don't see anything?
Now, yes.
You do? Okay, great. So I'm happy we get that. After 2 years into Zoom, you would think I would be a pro, but no. Okay, so I'm going to be speaking, as you said, about Irving Greenberg and Ovadia Yosef, and I will get a little bit about who they are, but I have to give a short introduction to what we're going to be doing today. So imagine editing a volume of the complete works of Nietzsche. Would you include a volume of a laundry bill you found in one of his notebooks? So this question, presented by Foucault for his own reasons, tries to tell researchers to be more flexible about what is in and what is out, what is worth interpretation and what isn't. So Nietzsche's bill might be considered interesting for a meticulous historian, but philosophers would probably find it irrelevant. So in general, the humanities favor books, manuscripts, diaries, believing that, quote, fleeting words do not have scholarly importance because they are, like oral invocations, immediately consumed and forgotten. But if in the past, oral invocations were lost once they were said, once they were spoken, and therefore inaccessible to researchers, today technological advancements have managed to overcome the ephemerality of speech. So my project argues for the inclusion of text stored in audio or audiovisual formats in the study and understanding of modern Jewish thinking, philosophy, theology, doesn't really matter, using performance theory and narratology. So I focus on Irving Greenberg, Irving Greenberg, and Ovadia Yosef, not only because they're 20th century public intellectuals, and all three of them are self-defined Orthodox Jews, but because of their commitment to public speaking and the abundance of materials we have to work with. So simply put, my project doesn't only read them, it also listens and watches them. So what is this putting these three people together? It is extremely bizarre, and I have to explain my decision. So I didn't choose them because they're self-defined Orthodox Jews, but I do have to explain what this common denominator has to say. So research agrees that in a nutshell, Orthodoxy is a modern phenomenon. In Europe, it was triggered by emancipation and secularization. And a century later, the same factors triggered a soft orthodoxy in Islamic countries. So theoretically, the theological distinction between Haredi orthodoxy and modern orthodoxy is the existence of a Das Torah ideology. This idea that the scholar, the Torah scholar, you should follow his guidance on all matters, not only religious matters, but on all matters. So if you're modern, you don't have this ideology, and if you're Haredi, you do have this ideology. But I take the divisions within Orthodoxy with a grain of salt, because differentiating between Orthodoxy and other forms of traditionalism is problematic. Anyway, all three of them were Orthodox. At least Greenberg claims to be Orthodox. That's a problem. Ovadia Yosef was the leader of the political he was the chief rabbi in Israel in the 1970s, and then he was the head of the Shas party of the Mizrahi Dvori in Israel. At the height of it, they had 19 seats in the Knesset, a huge phenomenon, household name. 1 million people came to his funeral. Ovadia Yishai Leibovich, a scientist in the Hebrew University, but also a philosopher, a public intellectual, the most outspoken critic of the Israeli way of dealing with the settlements at post-1967. Nils Greenberg, a feminist, a postmodern, open orthodoxy, interfaith person. Yeah, still with us. I send him my health because he's not doing so well. Okay, so let's talk about the troubles with working on audiovisual materials. When you're a researcher, you have books. So let's take Ovadia Yosef for an example. He wrote like dozens and dozens of encyclopedic, brilliant responsa and other halakhic writings. A lot of research has been done about what he's doing there, like legal halakhic, kind of very fascinating. Social critics, everything. You can find it, dozens and dozens of books. And then they're all of his, manuscripts, his personal book writing since he was 17, 15, 12, 11. We have all these, so much things. But except for that, we have thousands of recordings, audiovisual recordings, and only audio recordings, the older ones. But in those recordings, we have bodies, we have interactions, we have stories, we have performances. So what do you do with all this? How can you do what? So my research is not only about using these new kinds of sources, it's also how should I be using these kinds of sources? That's what I'm trying to do. And I have to give a little terminology. So I define the difference between audiovisual text and written text in a very broad sense. And I wrote /audio/visual because sometimes I have only audio and sometimes I have audio and visual because the camera can do a lot of manipulation. I only use very simple visual cues because otherwise it's a secondary performance because the camera itself adds things. So I'm fine with only audio, even though I love audio visual because sometimes you can see that the crowd is laughing. If you just listen, you have no idea what happened, but then you see a flick of the hand and then you realize what just happened in the room. So the oral turn was brought about by the guy, I can't pronounce his name, who I put, the father of modern linguistics, who I can't pronounce his name, so I don't want to make up myself ridiculous. And then in the Toronto School of Communication, we have people like Walter Ong talking about the importance of the oral work and about how researchers have this bias, ideological bias against the oral works, preferring the written text, thinking they're more serious, more influential or whatever. Actually, this Lucia said, the guy I can't pronounce his name, that people think about going to the written text. It's like, if I want to know how somebody looks like, I should look at his face. I shouldn't study his photograph or his picture. So that's where I'm coming from, this oral turn. But in modern Jewish thought, it's less common. And I have other two things I speak about. The first is performance. And I just want to talk about Irving Goffman for a moment, who said that most of the time when people are talking, they're not trying to, pass on information. They're actually, they're doing performance, they're recounting things, and it's just all about the storytelling. And it's not about the claims. And performance theory is huge. There's a lot to talk about it, of how the person is speaking, and he's both, or she, both saying something and also getting into some sort of a character who's saying it. It's not the same person who wrote the text, all kinds of games. And when I'm talking about architecture, I'm talking about something very formal. I'm talking about what is the shape of this talk? Is there a claim and then examples? Are there stories? Are there jumping side talk? What's going on there? So I think that form is also content. So I'm interested, if I take an oral delivery and I see something strange about the form of the oral delivery, which is never, or maybe I shouldn't say never, it shouldn't look like a written delivery because it's a different medium. I should look at it. What's happening here? And then I have something more to say about this theory, this theorist. So maybe my trio is actually perfectly reasonable if what I'm trying to put side by side is not their theories, but their performances. And I don't know if you see these are GIFs, but these, do you see them? They're moving here, and you can see they have very specific body language and many more things we're going to be talking about. Okay, so I want to begin with the end. My project has wait one moment. My project has two aims. First, I believe that looking in the audiovisual material helps us understand each of these people as individually. For instance, I look at the research conducted on Irving Greenberg, and I see that all the researchers are talking about, is he an Orthodox Jew or is he not an Orthodox Jew? Is he a postmodern Orthodox Jew? What's? And I say, wait a moment, we can look at his oral deliveries and we can see what he's doing there, how they're shaped, what's his performance like, and we can have another way of deciding this question. Same thing with Leibovitz. People are like, why is he using so many paradoxes? Why can't he make sense? Why are all his claims so looped around? He's a genius, but he's doing bad philosophy on purpose. So I say, okay, so let's not read his book, but just see how he's doing this bad reasoning, good and bad. And same thing with Ovadia Yosef. People can't understand, how could he be so awful, saying the worst things, calling people names, being very brutal, so bad that then it would be in the news tomorrow. Oh, Ovadia Yosef said something nasty. When he's such a brilliant scholar, he's an elitist. How can he be talking like a guy in the market? So I say, okay, most researchers find it a problem. Benny Lau even said, you can't understand Ovadia Yosef if you watch him giving his sermon. You have to read him to understand who he is. I'm like, no, that's wrong. You have to do both. That's how you'll really understand it. So the first aim of mine is to understand each one of them in a better way using audiovisual material. And my second aim is to compare them, not in order to say what's different about them, they're very different, but to show the scope of oral deliveries there can be and what they can do. So that's where I'm going. And I don't know if I'll have time to talk about what I did with each one of them individually, so I'll just skip to the comparison, and I think that's the most interesting part anyway. So the narrator, let's talk about the narrator. The narrator is the person who's telling a story in oral, in any oral delivery. There's many more stories than in a book, because it's like, I want to tell you today about what I'm going to be writing, and all these things become little stories. I can't decide because it happens. So the narrator. There's three forms of narration, three focalizations, very, very basic. There's more complicated ways of showing this, but let's go with this Gérard Genès version. There's the omniscient narrator who knows the whole world, knows everything about the story he's telling. Once upon a time, in a village, lived the king and the queen, and he knows everything. He can read minds, he can know the future, everything. The external narrator is more like the scientist. He's part of the world, but he can only tell you things like he has, like it's an objectivist kind of thing. It's empirical. He can tell you, this is why this is X, this is what this guy said to me, but I don't know why he said that. And the internal narrator is telling a story, but everything is from his own personal experience. He's the center of the story because the story is about his own personal space. So most obviously, Leibovitz, Yosef, and Greenberg use three types of narrators, which I've written down here. This is really, I found like two cases for each, maybe 1.5 cases when they're breaking out of this narration style. So this is very, very, and the other thing I found is stylization. And I want to say also about the narration, the focal point, and also about stylization is something you can only see in the oral works. Maybe you can see them in the written text, but only if they weren't edited, just like the transcription. But once you edit it to print it out, it's all erased, and all you're left with is just the claims without all the things around it. So you can see that they all have like a mood or a style, whatever you want to call it. So Ovadia Yosef uses parody, like a Bakhtinian kind of parody. He'll use linguistic parody. He imitates other people's languages, and I'll show an example. He uses other people's accents. He borrows phrases to mock, and he tells funny stories, which make a claim. I'm a minority. I'm a minority. I'm a Sephardic Jew. The Ashkenazi hegemony is saying nasty things about us. I don't have a space for myself, so I'm going to come back with parody, because parody is something that the weak can do. So that's what's happening in the sermon. And Leibowitz uses irony. In irony, you can't believe he's like an unreliable narrator, because anything he says, you're like, seriously, you can't be meaning that. It doesn't make there's something incongruent with what you're saying, with what we know about you, what we know about the world, with what you said 10 days ago. It doesn't make sense. So you don't know. So you're like, yo, he can't really mean it. So then two things happen. Either, oh, he doesn't really mean it, he's an idiot, or he doesn't really mean it. I know he doesn't really mean it. I know what he means. That means I'm cool like him. He understands me. This is what Wayne Booth talks about, how irony creates a common space for those who get it, the in-group who get the irony. You can really see it happening he's talking, he's ironic, and then the audience is split into those who love him and those who want to kill him because they hate his guts. And irony is also a very modern, also postmodern, but it's a very modern kind of thing. And Greenberg uses satire. Now, in satire, it's like you take an existing story sometimes and you just satire it. You make a funny story about an existing story. That's one kind of satire. But satire really is a more broad way of talking about something that is wrong, but also having a certain vision of how it should be fixed. Problem is that Greenberg's satire is a little more diffused. It's a little more postmodern. He doesn't exactly say what the problem is, and he also doesn't exactly say what can be fixed. But it's a wholesome kind of feeling. You listen to it, you laugh, but it doesn't make you angry. It doesn't offend you, unlike parody. Parody does not offend you if you're in the in-group, but it does offend you if you're in the out-group. Okay, so these are just the three of them. And in terms of architecture, if I have to try and make some sort of map, if I have to take a transcription of these guys and turn it into something worthy of publication in written form, very problematic job sometimes. Well, evidently, if it's Leibowitz, it's not a problem. The guy spoke as if he's reading off a piece of paper. It's phenomenal. I once had a recording and I was sure he was reading off a paper, and then I saw it also a video. He wasn't. He was just speaking like that. So what does he do? He says, I'm going to claim A. I assume B. Therefore, C and D. Second claim. It's like, he's like, and I thought maybe this is a generational thing, but not. Other people in his generation were not. So it's like he has it's like he's a movie star who learned his lines by heart. And even if you see, like, you move 10 years forward, 10 years backwards, he's saying the exact same scripted text. It's crazy. And actually, really, he would give a lecture on the radio, and on the next day they would print it in the newspaper word for word. They didn't have to do anything. It's bizarre. People don't speak like that. It's crazy the way he speaks. It's really weird. It's bizarre. Greenberg, on the other hand, he's like phrasing in the other way. He usually has 2 or 3 texts going on at the same time. One text is more like his claims. The other text is like personal anecdotes, all kinds of sides, things that he has. And then he's like mingling the two. He jumps between the texts. And if you want to turn this into something printed, you have to decide, are you going to cut out the stories, the anecdotes? Are you going to cut out the claims? So usually in his books, they cut out the anecdotes, and then all you're left with are the claims. But that's not Greenberg. That's definitely not Greenberg. And finally, Yosef, it's very interesting. He has a sermon. His sermon is like an hour long. It's very entertaining, very engaging, full of stories, very witty, very smart. And you're listening, and he goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then after I transcribed this and looked at it, I'm like, wait a moment, there's an underlying claim here that only if you really notice how he moves from thing to thing, you can actually see this full structure. So also, if you think about autonomy of the learner, there's a lot of things going on here that aren't so formalistic anymore. There's like actually a lot going on. Okay, now we'll go into the comparisons. I'm going to give 3 incidents that I find to be very telling, in which the 3 of these guys were a character in the story world, this wasn't very common for Yosef. It was very common for Greenberg all the time, for Leibovich not so. But I have these 3 stories in which they're all talking about something that happened to them. So they're a character in the story. Obviously, it's not the narrator is also a character in the story, but the character in the story is not the narrator, because this is looking back at what happened, right? There's a few levels here, narratological levels that are happening here. I'm then going to show you the videos, but I chose for yourself to bring a different video because this story actually is pretty long. So in the video part, remember, I'm sorry, I didn't bring that. So what are these 3 stories? 3 situations. Yosef is telling this. He used to tell this a lot of time before Pesach. It was his go-to story. He's walking down the street. He's a young rabbi. He's walking down the street, and he sees a woman crying with a pot in her hand, and she's crying and crying. And he comes up to her, and what happened? And she's afraid that her food might be unkosher for Passover because her daughter, she cooked something in the wrong pot, and now she won't have any food to feed her father, her brother, her husband, sorry. And she's crying, and Yosef is like imitating her cry. It's supposed to be, it's kind of a comedian kind of thing. And then the outcome is that he ensures her that the food is kosher, and he will eat some if she doesn't believe it. And in the middle of all that, what happened was that she went to the Ashkenazi rabbi, who told her that it's absolutely not kosher, and she has to throw it all out. But Yosef says he saw that you're a blonde, so he thought you're Ashkenazi, but I know you're Persian, so for you it's kosher. So this is, Yosef here is the guy who saves the day, who knows everything about the world there is to know. He knows halakha, he knows the woman, he knows the rabbi, he knows everything, and he can save you. If you come to him, he will be your savior. Leibovich has a totally different situation. He's telling us about a journalist from the Times and from the London Times who came to him and asked him what is the meaning of Judaism. And they go through this Socratic dialogue, or every option that the journalist gives, Leibovich says is totally wrong, until finally Leibovich gives his definition, which is no definition at all, and he says we are fed up of being ruled by goyim. End of story. Nobody believes. I mean, what is this answer? It can't be true. It can't be serious. What's happening here? So is he supposed to be leading him in some sort of, in the Socratic dialogue? You're supposed to be bringing him into some sort of definition. Maybe it could be an aporia, like undecided, but definitely not this answer that he says it so strongly, but it's so empty. And Greenberg, again, totally different. He's retelling a joke. So he tells a joke twice. And in the first time he tells the joke, it's how he used to tell, then he tells it twice. So the second time, the way it should be told today. The joke is about what will happen when the Messiah will come. And in the old days, he would say that obviously when the Messiah comes, we'll ask him, is this your first or second coming? And obviously the end of the joke was that, of course, it's the first coming, right? But then he said, no, but I've rethought it. And then he gives his last punchline, where it's the no comment, very radical answer where we don't really care if it's your first or second coming. That's not the issue at all. We're really fine with Christian theology and Christians in general, and we really don't care. But this is a story about his own personal growth. It's about how he spoke to somebody and that person changed him. With Leibovich, he's speaking to somebody and changing that other interlocutor. And with Yosef, he speaks to somebody to save her. So these are very, very, very different stories, and you can find in the oral text, and they tell us so much about the way they were trying to build their authority and even the kind of political theory that they harbored. So let's see a few examples. How am I with the time? Just so I'll know.
You're good. You still have 9 minutes-ish.
Great. Okay, so now let's see if we have video, and I'm going to stop sharing one moment so I can do it with video. 1 second. Okay. That's not what I wanted. Okay. Sorry for that. I hope it will work now that you will be able to see. Okay, tell me if this works. Did you hear something?
No.
Didn't hear anything. Let's try one more time. I'm sorry for this. We did that. We got this earlier. We got this to work. Let's see if we can do this again. Do you hear something now?
Yes.
Perfect, great. So let's begin with as I told you, I didn't bring the story of Ovadia Yosef because it's a little too long, but I'll begin with this. Let's talk about the omniscient parody. So this is a favorite of Yosef. He would do this every single year. When he was talking about a certain portion you read right before Purim, he would tell his people, do not go to the Ashkenazi shuls. You gotta come only to our Mizrahi shuls where we really know the right way of reading the Torah. And this was actually a huge political thing because he wanted them to come to the right yeshivas. He didn't want them to look like Ashkenazim. He didn't want them to sound like Ashkenazim. And the way he attacks the Ashkenazim is that he imitates their enunciation, their accent. And you can watch this for a moment. One moment. Here.
קראתי בפרשת זכור, כמו שאומרים הספרדים, הוא ישמע כמו אשכנזים. לא יכול, אשר רוצו, לוחר, מולק. מה זה המולק? המלך. אומרים המולק. זה.
So you might think, what is the big deal? The guy, he said Amalek, not Amalek, but this is really, this is a serious political issue for him. And his way of trying to get the Sephardi world feel more like it's return the crown to return the glory to the crown, whatever I can, is by using this parodic voice. But he's omniscient because he knows everything. So when people say, in research, when they say, is he an elitist or is he a populist? He's both. He's both. And you can only see he's both. Not when you read his legal halachic writings, which are very, I mean, it should be studied, obviously. But when you watch him work with the public, you can see it's both. You can see it's both. Also, as I told you, the way he forms his lecture is something that is something missing. But if you're a strong student, you can then find that there's more knowledge than the little bits that he gives you. Now back to the story about the rational, about the that I gave before in the three examples. So here's the rational irony of Ludwig. So why is it rational? It's rational because he's using, it's discursive, it's like it's all about giving, you make a claim, then you have to prove it, but it's ironic because he can't in any way mean what he's saying. So look at this.
אשר למדינת ישראל, אני לגמרי לא התאכזבתי בה. להפך, אני יודע שאני שייך לאותו מיעוט, אני יודע שהיום זה מיעוט במדינת ישראל של אנשים שלא נתאכזבו ממדינת ישראל. שמעולם...
Let's stop here. I know I'm part of a minority that was never disappointed by the state of Israel. Now, seriously, the guy spent his entire life criticizing the state of Israel. Are you really not disappointed? So the only way to explain this not disappointed is what did he actually mean when he said he's not disappointed? Which means it's irony. Because if you say something which you don't mean, that's irony. Now let's see what he then goes on to say.
לשחרר אותנו משיבוד מלכויות. ולפני זמן מועט, במקרה הייתה לי שיחה ממושכת עם עיתונאי חשוב מחוץ לארץ, לא יהודי. והוא הציג לי את השאלה, What's the meaning of Zionism? מהי משמעות הציונות? וסיפר לי שהציג את השאלה הזאת כבר לאנשים שונים, סגנון העיתונאי שלנו קוראים להם אישים, על פי שאני מעולם לא הבנתי מה ההבדל בין אנשים ובין אישים. ובכן, הוא הציג את השאלה הזאת לאישים שונים וקיבל מהם תשובות שונות, לפי דעתי גם משונות, שלפי דבריו בלבלו אותו מאוד, I'm utterly confused. והנה אגיד לך מה הייתה התשובה שאני נתתי לו. אני אמרתי, המשמעות של הציונות היא We are fed up with being ruled by goyim.
Okay. And then he says, well, that's the function that the state fulfills. Now you say, so what? So I watched a piece of video on YouTube and I can say something nice about Hébraïque, but this is, I think, both rational and irony have a very deep philosophical underpinning, because like irony is something that was used a lot by Nietzsche, by Kierkegaard. Does this mean that he's a existentialist? What about his rationalism? What's happening there? So all these terms, they're not only stylistic observations, they're also philosophical agendas. Same thing with the omniscient parody, which I skipped over. Finally, satire in the subjective voice. I claim that this piece we're going to be watching now is radical theology, cannot be put into words, printed in books, and it's also very postmodern. And in research, people have been arguing is postmodern or not, because many of the things he writes are not, because he has this whole view of a meta-historical thing, what happened after the Holocaust, whatever, not our topic today. But I think that here it's obvious that he's postmodern because of his story. So let's watch it.
So I was joking and said, instead of fighting about this and denying each other, we should agree to work together to bring the Messiah. And when the Messiah comes, we'll ask the Messiah, is this your first and second time? So we don't have to argue, we don't have to make claims. We don't have to make claims, you don't have to attack the other guy. You know, be patient, you'll hear the right answer. And so, but then I told the leadership group yesterday, so my fantasy always was that it's what happens. The Messiah, by the way, the fact that Christians teach a second coming means that they have to admit the truth of Judaism, or that the world is not yet perfect. So that's another story. Then I also say, but for the record, our Shabbat is our way of admitting the truth of Christianity. There's a lot of redemption in the world right now. You know, in Shabbat, you act it. So my joke always was that I had this fantasy when Messiah comes, the Messiah will be asked and was found. Well, of course, it's my first time. I know the Christians were bad behaved. And of course, my Christian friend said to me, yeah, but I'm thinking the other way. He'll come and say this is the second coming, and all the Jews were in the mix. They should have given in the first time. So I said, I thought about it a long time, then I concluded that what's really going to happen is the Messiah is going to come. If we bring it, it'll come. It won't come by himself or herself, but we'll bring the Messiah. When we bring the Messiah,
okay,
we'll
and just here again, just to be really self-becoming is a postmodern kind of a way of writing and speaking and talking and being obsessed with about not talking for others and only talking for myself. And all of these things, these are all also claims. They're not only stylistic decisions. So I asked, did I find something new about these three? And I believe I did. And I hope I managed to convince you. So thank you so much, and I'll be happy to answer some questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Netta. Considering we're a small group, maybe we can just ask the question by opening our mics and then start a discussion maybe instead of a question after questions. Does anybody has a question for Netta right now or a comment? If not, I have a question for you. Well, and it's a question divided in three questions. Do you think that the use of audio and visual sources is favorable to nuance the writings of individuals to whom we don't have or no longer have access to? And in this perspective, would it not be interesting with individual that are still alive and more accessible to triangulate the data, certainly with written and audio visual sources of public performances, but also with interview directly with a researcher? Yeah. And I will stop there because it's two questions already.
Yeah, so I'll talk in terms of the triangulation. Definitely, that's something I actually really did. I had 4 versions of the same speech, written notebook, 2 times given, and I showed that these 4 things are different. Something I didn't get into is the difference between the archive and the performance. It's a Diana Taylor idea. She's like, researchers, they like the archive. They don't like the mission is, who cares about that? But no, the archive is static and the repertoire is alive and is different. So definitely, I think you should be triangulating data. I'm not about throwing books into the garbage. Absolutely not. I'm just saying that there's more than what you can also do performative reading of a book, but there's so much going on in the recordings. And in terms of people that we do not have any info, I think that anything we have, I mean, I'm not going until the bill from the laundry. That's too much. But anything we have where a person is making claims, like I have to, let's say I had Nietzsche speaking to his laundry guy about what's happening these days. I had a recording of that. I'd be very interested to see how he's arguing about the news today. I'd like that, right? So yes, definitely. And you were saying, if I didn't, like people who haven't written anything down, so maybe they don't have a stature, but we do have recordings of them teaching. Whoa, yeah, we could reinvigorate people who have been forgotten because we don't have recordings of them, and vice versa. There's even there's examples, I think. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. And in terms of the researchers themselves, well, if you make a recording of a researcher, that's everything I said about how to read the original thinker. You then have to apply to the researcher, and you can just go on and just talk about how I gave my performance, and then it's about me and it's not about the researcher. But maybe you can then, I mean, interesting.
Thank you very much. Valentina?
Yes, thank you, Netta. I enjoyed the content because it's 3 characters that I've heard about, but I know something about that. I never read them, and I enjoy the way you presented them. It's more of a reflection, but I would like to hear you. But well, first of all, I'm sorry, I apologize, but I don't remember what is your discipline.
Oh, that's a good question.
And if you answer me, maybe I'll be able to articulate my common question.
Well, yeah, I was working in I was working in Jewish thought for my master's, and then for different very unimportant reasons, I moved into the Department of Jewish Education.
Okay.
If that tells you anything, I'm not sure it does, but that's
no, because I mean it just gives me some coordinate. But actually, what I was thinking is that, but you correct me if I'm wrong, I feel that your work it's more about discussing how we can study some thinkers rather than the thinkers themselves. So it's not really about them. It could have been, I don't know, Judith Butler and other kind of completely different, or the question is, or there is a question behind that, why you choose these 3 thinkers. There is a connection between them, the fact that they are one Orthodox, but one Ashkenazi. So in the end, what is going to be what is the thread that connects the 3 of them and your work? Yes, if I may.
Yeah, I agree that this could be done for anybody. This could be done on Judith Butler. It could be anything. I mean, Michel Foucault, whatever you are, whatever is your discipline, you can choose the people there and you do it. But the reason I chose them is because really a lot of these texts, they're not lectures in the university. They're somewhere between a public sermon and something. And I say that people come to these lectures not only to gain information, but to gain knowledge and to change. And that is why this is about adult education. It's a different kind of thing. Okay. So some people might study Judith Butler like that. That may very well be, but that's the kind of, I didn't get into it. There's a lot of educational theory behind this. How do I come up to a guy and try to convince him about anything? These 3 people had very different ideas. What kind of right do I have to even try and convince you? So the modernism, the high modernism of Yeshayahu Leibovich is all about, you can't convince anybody with anything. All you can do is get them mad, you know, because that was his ideas about so really I think the thread is that these are people that are interested in trying to either enter into an educational discussion like Greenberg. He won't educate you, he'll go into dialogue with you, and you will change him and he will change you, right? But it's all people that were about adult education, very broadly defined. Jordan, you want to say something?
Yes, I do. Sorry. Hi, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for this presentation. I was sort of hiding in the back with my camera off for the duration of your talk, but I really enjoyed it, particularly because the title of your presentation caught my eye, as I'm currently in a seminar titled Jewish and Indigenous Voices in Canada. And I thought that particularly you had a line at the beginning of your presentation on the modern overcoming of the ephemerality of speech, which I thought was really important and connected well to some of the ideas that I've been thinking about in the context of this course. Which leads me to my question. The structures that you're offering as sort of an analytical tool for these three speakers, which could really be applied to anyone or any three people. And another side comment before I get to the question. I love when people take three sort of disparate subjects and put them together just to see what happens. You know, there's sort of a structure to the entropy that I really find really appealing. So thank you for that. But my question is, have you theorized like the voice itself, the voice in and of itself within your analysis?
You mean the vocality?
There's so many ways. I think the voice as a thing, as a discursive topic can refer to, you know, the timbre of one's voice, but it's also quite metaphorical.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Particularly, there was a Sephardi rabbi and the Ashkenazim who, you know, have this sort of tension toward one another and understand each other's voices in particular ways. This might be a self-serving question just because I've been thinking about voices so much, but I think it applies so well within your project. So I'm wondering if you've given, you know, any thought to like what it means to talk about a voice in relation to this analysis.
Yes, I agree. Voice is it's a very important category. In the end, I called it stylization, you know, the parody, the satire, but it was like, is this voice? Is this mood? What is this really, right? Because into voice, I tried to, maybe you know better than I am. I couldn't find like one clear-cut definition that I could just go with and say, this is what I'm going to be talking about when I say voice. So I made up a word and I called it stylization because I was just going crazy trying to figure out what is voice. I was using all these, you know, but yeah, in my gut feeling, absolutely voice is super important. It's about who I am versus my audience, who I am versus the world, who I am versus my performative self, my real self, which I kind of hide, my audience, my implied audience, my real audience, I don't know. Yes, and I have to say, even about the voice, the actual voice, because I'm interested, I analyzed, you know, the Hebrew in all three, Hebrew and English, and all three of them is a different kind of Hebrew. Yet Greenberg does speak Hebrew, but not so much. But his English also, he has a Yiddish accent, he has a Brooklyn accent, he has a Borough Park accent. This is all things I've really noticed. And I could just give you a small anecdote, really interesting. David Hartman, who used to be in Canada, when he spoke Hebrew in the 1970s, I've heard him, he would speak Hebrew in a really good Israeli accent. But already when he was in Israel, 30 years later, he would speak English in a really heavy Yiddish accent, like really. And this is a decision. This is a performance. In Canada, he wanted to sound like an Israeli, and in Israel, he didn't. So so even just the way your diction, it could be very important to know about. So thank you. And you can write to me if you have any ideas about voice that I missed. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks. I'm really intrigued by this. I'm sort of lost between the forest and the trees a little bit on this, because I'll sort of start, let me just kind of back up and I'll tell you. So a few years back, and I can't remember who wrote this, so I'm terrible and apologies for this, but I read an article about how Kafka's writing was tremendously subjective, and how we are sort of led through, there's this uncomfortable claustrophobia when we read Kafka, because the world is just subjective. There's no context beyond that. And I sort of have always thought about that as relating somehow to, you know, the Jewish condition around the time of Kafka's writing and what he's thinking about. And what I'd like to sort of hear more about is how the particular, I don't know if it's stylizations or performance or whatever of these, you know, the different parameters that you've set out, how these speak to the Jewish condition and what we can learn from that. I think that's the part that I'm waiting for the punchline, sort of to steal. I think it was at Greenberg. You know, I don't want no comment. I need a comment. I need to know what we learn from this. I wonder if you can speak to that.
Well, amazing question. And I didn't know that article about Kafka, and I really, if you ever find it, I'd like that, because it's good. It could actually help me, because Greenberg has subjectivism, but he does satire, which is countermining that. The bottom line is that we have these three contemporary people, all of them really invested in the Jewish condition, but they define it so differently, and they go about it so differently. There is no one Jewish voice. There is no one Jewish condition. There are three, just these three. And the three people I found, I built the model around them. If I would have taken the Lubavitcher, I would have found maybe something different. He might have been using the omniscient voice like Yosef, but maybe not. I don't know, right? And I see what all three of them really are worried about, and this is where I think you find a link. They're very worried about, how can I take the people that are coming to talk to me, coming to listen to me, and make them see what I see, and convince them in a way that is legitimate. What is a legitimate form of argumentation? So parody is legitimate for the thinker who uses the very modern forms of political power. That's Yosef. That's not pre-modern thinking. Maybe the omniscient voice would say it's pre-modern, but the parody is very not. That's how he thinks he thinks it's very legitimate. And he thinks, if I'm on the bottom, I'll use parody and I'll try to move myself up. Yosef and Greenberg would be offended by that, terribly offended by that, right? It's so the trying to find the legitimate way to convince your audience is the thread, but the ways they do it is different. I can't say I found one. I can't. Maybe if I would have taken three that were more similar, I could have tried to make a synthesis, but I can't synthesize these things at all. That's the rough edges. I was once told, your project doesn't have enough rough edges, so you've just pointed on the rough edge of my project. So thank you for that.
No, it's my pleasure. I just think it's so neat to think about. I mean, this idea of modes of discourse, right? And this there's a World War I historian, Paul Fussell, who wrote that irony was born in the trenches, right? That there was no such thing as really irony before that. Now, I don't know if that relates, but in some respects, it does have to do, that there are times at which there are types of modes of communication, right, that resonate, and at other times they fall away entirely. So I don't know whether that the project actually, just as you said, it's sort of, your project says there are a million voices, and the plurality of the Jewish condition in the modern age can't be captured. I mean, maybe that's there's no comment. The comment is there is no answer, right? Anyway, I'll shut up. That's it. But thank you very much, Netta. That was really neat.
I want to give a little follow-up because of what you said. So when I was just looking at the narrator, the focalization, it was too easy, because omniscient narrator is the pre-modern, early modern novels. And then the objectivist novel is like some sort of, there was a modern face. And then the postmodern voice is the internal, the broken up, and then it was just too cute that it had these three Haredi, modern and postmodern Jew, and they were talking like novels. But then I said, this is too simplistic. This is really too simplistic because there's other things happening at the same time. So were they influenced by the discourses of their time? There are, there's 25 years between when they were born, and they were born in different places. Yosef was born in Baghdad, right? But it's too cute to say that that's the reason. So I didn't say that, but I could.
I'm sorry, I'm so used to Zoom decorum. I can't speak unless someone says that I can, but I'll just go ahead. I just wanted to sort of riff off of Hernan's comment and just say that for me, the takeaway of your project, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but as you were speaking, I was just thinking about our tendency to think about pre-modern Judaism with these particularly static notions. And I think your use of technology to rethink our relationship to text and discourse and rabbinic doctrine is useful for helping us rethink the Jewish world, the Jewish conditions across time and space. I think we have there's a tendency, not just within Jewish academia, but within the Jewish world more broadly, to think of, Jewish history or like 17th century Europe as like the rabbi said this thing and then everyone was just sort of in agreement. And the videos that you're offering sort of help us like imagine discourse and dissent within these particular communities, not just between rabbis who were able to write it down and sort of have it moved into the archive of the now, but real people engaging with these real ideas and having the rabbis actually sort of not just this supreme power, the supreme omniscient being, but also responding to particular concerns of the people as well. I think your project does such a good job of like reminding us of these historical realities. So my commencement to you.
Yes. I had a person who works on sermons from the Middle Ages. He was like, oh my gosh, I'd kill for one of these sources. I'd kill. It's like, we don't know. Was this a joke? Did everybody laugh? I'm like, probably they did, because that's what happens in sermons. But yes, I agree with you.
Do we have another question or comment? Okay, so if there's no other questions, as the hour draws to an end, let me gently conclude our discussion. Thank you, Netta, so much for your presentation. And also thank you to everyone for participating. It was really an amazing lecture. And let me invite you all to our next lecture that will be in French. The title is Adorno et le judaïsme, réflexion sur ce quelque chose du judaïsme qui transparaît chez certains penseurs juifs alors qu'ils ne sont plus de rapport direct avec les études juives, de Mario Ionut Marosand on March 23rd